Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. This is our Thursday night broadcast, and we've been going through Matthew through Jewish eyes. And actually tonight it looks as though things appeared on YouTube. People are starting to come in. I'm excited to see that. We're going to be dealing with Jesus beginning to talk about the deficiencies that he finds with the Pharisees. Remember that last time he had left them with a question that they could not answer. And so now he's going to go ahead and deal with them. And we'll see how this all plays out. So let me go ahead and get set here. Just throw on the banners. I don't know if any of these new subscribers will join us for live, but certainly they've subscribed and hopefully they'll enjoy the show either now or later on. And I will stick the subscribe up there so that you can see it. And so if you watch this later on and you've not subscribed, please do. Of course, most of the people in the house are already there. So let's get, someone said, TikTok time to rock. So let's go ahead and do that. Get the screen sharing up here. All right, there we are. I'm going to remove that banner because that's probably a little distracting. And that's okay. We don't need that right now. We'll let that go down here and leave that for right now. Now, I know that leaves a little bit of a background, but overlays are overlays. And so we'll just jig with it. I don't know if it shows on the set there, but this is a moving background, but it just ain't moving real fast. There we go. And so hopefully you can enjoy that. I don't know. Animation is just really kind of a neat thing. Didn't used to have that. I'm from the old school when PowerPoint first came out. So, okay. Now again, you want to know where we're at. I'm going to go ahead and switch that out. We are at the beginning of Matthew 23. You see all that red letter there? That's where we're going to be headed. Jesus talking about the Pharisees. And what we're going to see is, if you're looking at the top of that, now I can make that bigger through the incredible ability of Logos to go ahead and get bigger there. So I'm going to move that up. Little clever trick. And you're going to see in 23:1 in just a second or two that Jesus is talking to the multitudes and to his disciples. So the attention is now changed. All three groups have had their shot at him. He has soundly defeated them. He is now going to switch his attention to his disciples and the crowds. And that's where we are right now. So the text will actually be in the PowerPoint, but I wanted to give you opportunity to know where to turn. And I'm going to jump back to our PowerPoint. There we go. So nice to be able to do that. Okay. He's through trying to persuade the religious leaders, and now he goes directly to the people and starts instructing them. At this point, they are settled in their resolve to destroy him. They are not open to his messianic claims, and you're going to see this continue, but there's a real hardening of positions here, and that's what you need to be aware of. So now the attention's going to turn to the people and to his disciples. Now, he's been training his disciples all along, and they're going to continue the work. But he's also turning to the crowds. And we saw that. In fact, we see it when I put it up on the slide. And so you have the multitudes and you have his disciples, his methetes, or his talmidim in Hebrew, saying the scribes and Pharisees sit in the seat of Moses. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do. But do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do. They bind heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. Some translations read that a little differently there. But all their works they do to be seen by men. And they make their phylacteries broad and enlarge the borders of their garments. They love the best place at the feasts and the best seats in the synagogue, greetings in the marketplace, and to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi. But you do not be called Rabbi, for one is your teacher, the Christ, and you are all brethren. Now, we're not going to get through all of this section tonight, because next week, when we talk about their phylacteries being broad and their borders of the garments, I actually want to go on and show you a set of phylacteries, what the size is today, and how they would make them broader, and give you an idea of what that command is all about. And then the borders of their garments, and explain what that is and how they made them bigger. So you'll get some visuals, and hopefully that'll work on camera so that you can understand what he's talking about. And we'll go into what he means by some of the other material here. So we're just starting 23. This is not going to break down perfectly according to Pericopes, because really the chapter as a whole is almost like one pericope. There are some, there's got to be some natural divisions, but it's just a lot of text. It's just a lot of text, and it's really packed. So we're going to do things a little differently. Now, there you go. We've got my friend here, Amy. She's back with her cup of coffee. When this is all over tonight, I've got some chamomile tea, which will be preferred to a cup of coffee. Now, what you need to understand is that most people are unaware that Moses' seat was the name given to a special chair of honor in the synagogue. I'm going to actually show you a picture of that, because most people think it's just a figure of speech, but it's an actual place in the synagogue where authoritative interpretation of the law of Moses was where an authoritative interpreter of the law of Moses was seated. In a symbolic sense, sitting in Moses' seat meant teaching from the 5 books of Moses, the Pentateuch. The scribes were looked upon as being the recognized exegetes of the law of Moses, while the Pharisees were the spokesman for the unwritten or oral tradition. We've talked about the oral law, and the Pharisees really are the ones that kind of promote that agenda. And so those comments really don't come from me. They come from the Bible Dictionary again. It's the same one I've referred to last week. So if you look back at it, we're talking about the New Bible Dictionary. But I wanted to show you what Moses' seat looks like. So you see that chair there? That's an ancient synagogue, and that is the archaeological find. I mean, against the wall of that synagogue was Moses' seat. This is a very old temple, but Moses' seat has not totally decayed, and that's what it looks like. So the official interpreter or exegeter of the word would sit in that seat, and he would go ahead and speak. Now, I didn't include the slide, but the idea of sitting and speaking, the idea of seated in an authoritative sort of place, as seated authoritatively, that kind of idea is the word cathedra. Now, I don't know if any of you have run into Catholics, but you use the term ex cathedra, which means from the chair. And the Catholic Church purloined elements of Old Testament worship, mixing them with some elements of things around them, and created Roman Catholicism. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say that. I'm going to put that out there. They didn't create Christianity. Christianity predates Roman Catholicism, but Roman Catholicism is a thing that comes out of Christianity. And so there's a mixture of elements there. There is nothing in the New Testament to indicate that some people have an authoritative position as far as absolute authority over others. What I mean is the priesthood of all believers. Okay, there are offices in the church and there's gifting in the church, but the idea of someone having authority in the way that a Catholic priest has authority over his parishioners is not the way a pastor functions, and that isn't New Testament Christianity. And so Catholicism comes out of Christianity, and it's a variant. And this particular variant took some features of the Old Testament. Now, although this isn't in the slides, that's probably due to replacement theology. They looked upon themselves as new Israel, and so they had every right to appropriate elements of Jewish worship and change them whichever way they felt their leadership was directing them to do. And so there was a papal chair, just like there was Moses' seat. And when the Pope speaks, he speaks ex cathedra, out of or from the chair. So there's a little bit of history here tying Moses' seat to the papal position of speaking ex cathedra. In fact, a Catholic individual that I was talking about spiritual things with and the Lord with said that it's very simple. When the Pope says something that is not true, if he isn't sitting in the chair, it doesn't count. Okay. So it's only when he's seated and gives a papal announcement that is binding on Catholics. Now, where did it all come from? Because there really was a chair that was Moses's chair. That was the official place where a person would exegete from. But that doesn't tell us what point Jesus is making. And that's why Amy goes ahead and raises this question. Jesus acknowledges that they teach in accordance with the scriptures. Now, we need to understand that. The Pharisees have their problems, but their exegesis is not their biggest problem. Does that mean they got everything right? No. In fact, I'm here to tell you that no Bible teacher gets everything right all the time. But were they teaching in accordance with the scriptures? Jesus, by saying they sit in the seat of Moses, allows them that position. He acknowledges that they generally practice principles of sound exegesis and Bible interpretation. He also will go on to point out that their teaching and their practice don't fit together that well. And this quote is right out of the article on Moses' chair in Baker's Encyclopedia of the Bible. And so we need to understand that Jesus's main qualm with the Pharisees was not their exegesis or their interpretation of the scripture. That was a qualm he had with the Sadducees, and with the Herodians, he didn't even bother because they weren't a religious sect, they were a political sect. And Jesus has his own opinions about Herod, I should say. And so they really do have a certain position here. He doesn't challenge their right, for he commands his hearers to practice and observe whatever they tell you to do, but don't do it in the way they do it. And so he's going to warn people against their works, but he isn't going to spend a lot of time warning them against the exegesis that these guys end up doing. Okay. Now, there are occasions in which he attacks the unbiblical traditions that they have added to the law. Now, that's where the Pharisees come in, and they're champions of what becomes the oral law. And Jesus takes issue with the oral law and them adding it to the written law, which is, by the way, the same disease in a sense that modern Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, still suffers from today. So he might very well attack elements of Talmud, but he acknowledges their position. Now, I want to go ahead and deal with characterizations, because the Pharisees have been the whipping post, in a sense, for a very long time. And they have their problems. And we're going to see Jesus discussing the first of those problems tonight. But we have to be real careful about characterizations. And that's why I went to Richard T. Franz. They were definitely very zealous for the law. Pay attention to that. I mean, Paul was by nature a Pharisee. He says he was a Pharisee of Pharisees. And so he was very devoted to the scrupulous observance of the full range of rabbinic legislation and the law. Now, remember, the Pharisees attached the oral law to the written law. Not all of the Pharisees, by the way, are portrayed poorly in Scripture. Remember Nicodemus, a leader of the people that was part of the party of the Pharisees. And so Richard T. Franz says they were generally speaking earnest, moral people, and Jesus' attacks here may seem harsh and unfair. Now, he says they seem to many harsh and unfair. Now, Jesus is going to have reasons to attack these guys, okay? But we have to be real careful, because we would have to look upon Nicodemus very, very poorly if we were to paint these guys all with a brush. By the way, rabbinical literature even attacks some of the extremes of some of the Pharisees. But I'm just saying, when you're looking at a group, you need to look at the individuals. It's very, very easy just to paint these guys. In fact, unfortunately, they are the butt of a lot of things. I remember the Donut Man. I don't know if any of you remember it, but my kids grew up, and there was a certain amount of Christian literature on, and I thought the Donut Man was cute. Some of the Bible stories were nice. The points were good. But there were some things I really disliked about the Donut Man. There were some things that were a little inaccurate. There were some things that gave impressions to children that I didn't like. And so I've heard this little ditty over and over again. I don't want to be a Pharisee because they're not fair, you see. Well, that little ditty is a little bit of an overcharacterization. They clearly were transgressors and resisted Jesus, but not all of them were at the same place, and not all of them resisted Jesus, going back to Nicodemus. And so we want to be a little careful what we fill kids' heads with. And by the way, vilifying the opposition is not necessarily the most Christian thing to do. It's tempting. I might fall into it, but ad hominem arguments are not likely to be all that persuasive. They get bigger rebuke because they're closer doctrinally, but their practice so doesn't match up with their doctrine. We're going to talk about that problem. Just be a little careful. I wouldn't run around my Catholic neighbor's house, pull his kids along, and saying nasty things about Catholics everywhere. Even though on a show like this, I might doctrinally critique Catholicism. And Jack's making the comment that instead of being like defiant, visibly, I think this is a point he's making. This is what I'm getting from it. That they were closer in that they attempted to observe the law, plus some additional commandments they added for sure, which were a lot of additional commandments. I'm just saying, get a good grip on the group you're dealing with. And Jack made a very good point. There were those that didn't even care what God said. These people did care what God said. So I may deal differently with an earnest Orthodox Jew than I necessarily would with somebody who is a militant something else. Again, the Orthodox, sincere Jewish person may be trying to obey God and failing miserably, but the attempt may be there, and it may be somewhat a sinful yet somewhat earnest attempt. Anyway, so I'm not a big fan of the Donut Man, some of those ditties, but I am a fan of the fact he told some great Bible stories. The music was pretty decent. Some of the humor was good, and it did get Bible stories into children. But I kind of wish he'd be a little careful. Well, you know, I painted these guys as proper exegetes, even acknowledged to be proper exegetes by Jesus. So does Jesus have a problem with these guys? Well, I think he really does. So let's start looking at it. Now, he's going to basically raise two issues here. Okay, he's going to raise the issue that their conduct is ungodly, although their doctrine is solid. By the way, that's an important point we're going to revisit later on. Simply knowing a whole lot of theology, but living horribly doesn't necessarily do what it needs to do. Okay, it leaves you in a position of duplicity, which Jesus is not fond of. The other thing is their piety is false. It's a front. They're showing off how wonderfully religious they are. Okay, and so he's going to take issue with false piety, which, by the way, so did the prophets. Now, what's at stake here is the issue of the heart. And I like to go back to this. I haven't done a refrigerator magnet saying. I stuck one up there on Patreon, and I'm, I think, a little refrigerator magnet saying devotional. But, you know, when I put one together, one of my refrigerator magnet sayings is the heart of the issue is the issue of the heart. And so Jesus is going to deal with them in terms of the issue of the heart. Now, this is Richard T. France. The quote's going to be repeated twice, but what I did is I focused on a different part of France's quote each time. So his concern it goes beyond. He's concerned about the system which they upheld, because everybody falls short. But the point is they're insisting on a system with more and more rules. And this is creating a situation where they're in danger of ignoring heart attitudes and motives and putting adherence to the system before the will of God. Now, he does attack that, and that's the oral law. And so where Jesus sees them making more and more rules, and we'll talk about that, and ignoring heart attitudes, he knows that they have a heart problem. Okay. The point is that it's not necessarily that these guys set out to be irreligious. It's that their conduct ends up being irreligious because they are more concerned about the outward performance than the inward attitude. Now, what did I do here? Well, as we switch and we go on here, Jesus is going to use a term. And so I'm going to pull this back up for you, okay? And he's going to use this term over and over. This term first appears in verse 13, and it's the word woe. See that? I'm putting that up there on the screen, and that's in verse 13. So he's going to switch to a series of woes. And this is going to go from just him, stating what's wrong with these guys to him going into what's called lament. And I wanted to take a little time to look at what lament is and this form of address which he's going to switch to. So let me switch back there, understanding lament. Because Jesus is going to switch to lament. Now, he's going to lay some charges at his feet. Then he's going to continue to talk to them about coming judgment. But he's going to do it in the form of what's called a lament. So we saw that word, okay? I thought it looked a lot like oy vey, which is a very Yiddish term. Ulai, the Greek, is translated by a Hebrew word, hoy in the Hebrew. And this basic utterance, it's an interjection, but it's used a lot by the prophets. It's used regularly in laments, songs written to remind or to commemorate the fall of the city of Jerusalem. Hoy is used to warn a city of impending judgment. It can be used to introduce a prophetic declaration of judgment. It's applied to groups of people and individuals who are wicked in Isaiah 5. The prophet Habakkuk delivers 5 woes to the city and kingdom of Babylon. This is Eugene Carpenter and Phil W. Comfort in the Treasury of Key Bible Words. A nice little resource, by the way. And lament, which is what this is going to turn into. Jesus is acting in his prophetic office. Now, understand this. Jesus has been teaching authoritatively. He's come to present himself as king. When he starts presenting these woes and talking about the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, he's going to be acting actually as a prophet in the prophetic office. Now, what do I mean by all that? There are 3 basic offices that you're going to find in the Old Testament. Now, offices are different than gifts and some things like that, but those offices are prophet, priest, and king. These are the 3 basic offices that are necessary for man corporately to relate to God and God to relate back to man in a way that is befitting who he is and who man was created to be. The king basically executes rule. Think of him as sort of the executive branch. He makes laws in accordance with God's law. That's the way it was supposed to work in a theocracy. And he was to implement God's commands on a national level. The priest represented the people before God. He was a mediator. The prophet represented God before the people. He was a forthteller or declarer. And the prophets used this particular term extensively. When Jesus switches from this telling them about their sin, he's actually going to be using the woe, which is used a lot by the prophets to indicate impending judgment and great sorrow over the loss these people are going to experience. Okay? In fact, Tasker, in his basic dictionary, New Bible Dictionary, says this: when Jesus says, "Woe unto you," he is not pronouncing a final judgment as deploring the miserable condition in God's sights of those he's addressing. Their wretchedness lies not least in the fact that they are living in a fool's paradise, unaware of the misery that awaits them, the state of their materially minded, blinded by wealth to their spiritual needs, of self-satisfaction, of impenitence and unsympatheticness, and those who are universally popular declared by Jesus to be wretched. Similarly, their woeful condition of the Pharisees and scribes lies that Jesus tells them in their hypocritical zeal but lack of proportion, love of display, and self-complacency, which disfigure their religion. Okay, that's a lot of verbiage. Let me break it down for you, okay? Jesus considers them in a decrepit position because of the false piety, the hypocrisy, and the fact that their conduct is so far removed from the truth they espouse. That's an interesting observation. Thank you, Jack, for that observation. That is interesting. That is a good observation. False religiosity. Now, what is false religiosity? Well, often can be coupled with doctrinal pride. Remember that Jesus said these individuals sat in Moses' seat. They were more theologically orthodox than some of the other sects of Judaism. They prided themselves on their outward practice and their doctrinal purity. And so false religiosity can also often be coupled with doctrinal pride. The two are not far removed from each other. Having good doctrine is terribly important, but being exceedingly proud of your incredible doctrine over others and using that in a way to exalt yourself is unacceptable. And so these two things sort of went together. Now, Jack's comment here about excessive rules is going to come into play here because they're going to talk about heavy burdens. Remember that Jesus in Matthew 23:4, and let me bring that back up again for you. There we go. For they bind heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. Now, I hope that appears as clear to you as it does to me on my large screen here. But that's really where we're at. And so given that Jesus accuses them of this, okay, I'll deal with that. That's the interesting thing in the queue there. A comment. That's why, essentially Amy asks, what are heavy burdens? Now, John Williams says he thinks that the parable of the unjust steward was given in response to critics saying he was too merciful by forgiving. Well, I don't quite know what to do with that. There are statements in Judaism, even rabbinical Judaism, about being peace-loving and forgiving. Hey, definitely gotta put that up there. It is so good to have Mr. Phil Fox in. So he sends his blessings, but he has blessed us with his presence. So that is just great. That's why Amy asks what heavy burdens are. It could be, John. I haven't considered that comment before. I think the way his critics probably would have put it is he is not being as strictly observant of the rules as he should be, rather than them stating it as him being too forgiving. Because it sounds kind of weird to say you're too forgiving. But you're letting people get away with things and you're not upholding the rules. Well, I could see that as a way that they would very much have responded to him. So I don't know. Maybe that's what they were thinking, but I don't know if that's exactly the way they would have put it. So that's an interesting question. So let's talk about these heavy burdens. This is the system of the oral law that Jesus is talking about. We're going to talk about how foolish this is and why would they do this? Why would you create rules around rules? I mean, why do that? If you're not following one rule, why would you create other rules around it? How does that make you more lawful? If you're not following the law, putting other rules around the law, is that going to make you more lawful? Why would they do this? Why would they place these heavy burdens? And by the way, growing up with an Orthodox grandfather, I could understand what Jesus was talking about, not because he was a bad guy, but because the rules could be so draconian. Whenever we try to protect ourselves from wrong just by multiplying rules, how does that really work? And so this is what would happen. I'd go to Yom Kippur and, there were these incredible restrictions. Like, it wasn't just sundown exactly or twilight when Yom Kippur ended and I could actually eat something, but it was actually after sunset, because the first 3 stars had to appear to make sure that you had fasted until evening. So you had to see those first 3 stars. Well, I have news for you. That really wasn't 24 hours exactly. It was actually a little closer to 27 by the time the synagogue service finally ended and we're like walking back home from the synagogue with my grandfather, and that's a 15-20 minute walk, and then washing our hands to sit at the table. We're talking about these additional rules. The Sabbath is a great one. I think about the Orthodox Jews that put timers in their house on the Sabbath so that they don't turn a light on the Sabbath. So you're keeping the rule of not turning a light on by having plugged in a timer that turns the light on. Okay. There were all these little tiny rules that actually added and made things more complicated, to the extent that you had another 600 rules around the 613. And so this becomes an impossible 18 minutes before sunset, so you're not lighting a candle on sunset. So now you've got a rule that you have to be 18 minutes earlier than the original thing. There were a host of things. Having 2 sets of dishes. To selling, this is always an interesting one for me. You would sell your dishes temporarily to your neighbor because those dishes had come in contact with bread during Passover, and so you were not possessing any chametz or leavened products because the dishes technically didn't belong to you. And then at the end of Passover, of course, you would give them a penny back, their money back, and then it would be okay. And again, I always jokingly thought that Gentiles who were non-Jews could have had a really good business here, buy the dishes for 50 cents, and when the Jewish person wants it back, you charge them $1.50. Okay, these little rules, they aren't your dishes because someone technically temporarily bought them from 7 days, but you'll be buying them back. But you fooled God because they aren't your dishes, even though they're in your house. Okay. And there's some interesting. This is very interesting. Now, the reason I'm putting this quote up is because we're going to talk about offense around the law and why these guys did this. Okay. And that comment goes right in with that, the idea of rails. Okay. Now, Ray says the USSR did that. Okay. I never thought of it in terms of the USSR. And this is an interesting question. Does God's mercy take away from his justice? I don't think any attribute of God could ever take away from any other attribute of God, because he has all those attributes all the time perfectly. So while God judges, he is also perfectly merciful even while he's judging. We tend to think of one attribute at a time, but God in his judgment is extending mercy. And in his mercy, there is judgment if that mercy is rejected. And so mercy and judgment are never separated. I like to think of them as two sides of the same coin, the same way that I think about judgment and love, that they're two sides of the same coin. I had to put this up. Yeah. Okay, Nate. Don't try that in Brooklyn right in front of everybody. That's pretty funny. That would be considered flagrant. Oh, my. Definitely an interesting idea there, Nate. The traditions are the oral law, and I keep pointing this out because this is still going on. So how did this come to be? How did this whole thing start? Well, the idea, and I want you to look at this verse. This is Pirkei Avot, and it's really Pirkei Avot, and I'm thinking it's chapter 1. I don't remember exactly which verse, but I want you to go ahead and see this verse. Moses received the Torah from Sinai and passed it on to Joshua, and Joshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets passed it on to the men of the great assembly. Now, they're claiming that the oral law was given at Sinai, but here's the interesting thing. They had 3 sayings. These are like the primary sayings in the oral law that, are like, the main thrusts, shall we say. Be deliberate in judging, educate many students. That would be disciples, by the way, in the Hebrew. Talmudim, that would be disciples. So make many disciples, actually, and make a fence around the Torah. And so this idea is encouraged of making all these rules around all these rules. Okay? And so the Pharisees took that very, very seriously. And those are the heavy burdens that Jesus is talking about. Making additional rules to make it harder and harder for people to be able to do what they need to do. Now, does God add to Torah? Yeah, he does add to Torah, and he does add some additional rules to kind of make things better, make application, create remembrances, because they tended to forget themselves. Things happened. But still, creating billions of rules on top of the already existing rules. Someone said it may require less thinking, but it certainly requires a better memory. Because who can remember all these things? This is really bad advice, that you should make new rules around the old rules to keep the old rules from being broken. It sounds like very good advice, but it really doesn't work real well. Which is going to bring us basically to our main point. This might seem a little short, but we can spend a little time with this, okay? This ignores a central truth. Rules don't make one good. Ceremonies don't make one good. The Pharisees, by doing this, thought that they would produce more obedient people towards God, and they would not have to risk being exiled or judged by God. Remember that these parties begin to exist after the Babylonian captivity. And in a sense, it's sort of a defense mechanism against violating God and being judged and possibly exiled. And so they thought this would produce better individuals. But to people become more lawful as you increase the number of rules they have to follow. And I think about it with the tax code, because April's coming up. We've given people breaks, but we've given all these rules around the breaks so that they don't abuse the tax break. I mean, regardless of politically where you are, that's kind of the thinking. And I remember the song, I Know an Old Woman Who Swallowed the Fly. I don't know why she swallowed the fly. Perhaps she'll die. And so John Williams is raising that. I'm not quite sure where that fits in, unless in terms of making more rules, we're dealing with, the old woman who swallowed the fly. Now, this is a real interesting appointment. Being holy made them separatists. I'm pondering that as I think about it. Attempting to be holy definitely did. I just don't know that Jesus would have considered them all that holy. And so that's a central truth, that our sin nature cannot be legislated away. By the way, it can't be educated away. One of the thoughts or main principles of humanism is that education would take care of all the moral problems in society. You can't educate away sin any more than you can legally, just through legalism, get rid of sin. I'm going to bring this up because sometimes the church tries the exact same thing. I'm not advocating what you do with playing cards, but you have to know that Moody Bible, which is an excellent school, at one point did not allow beards, even though D.L. Moody had a beard. The reason they didn't allow beards is they associated beards with the 60s, and they decided that beards were unspiritual. Now, I'm being flagrant. That's for Nate, who wants to broil the bacon cheeseburger here. At Moody, I'd be considered flagrant, right? At least at one time with this thing, which does need a little trimming. But this is like flagrant at Moody because they decided that beards were worldly because of the 60s. But D.L. Moody had a long flowing beard, probably longer even than mine. D.L. Moody smoked a pipe. I'm not advocating tobacco, by the way. Lung cancer and mouth cancer and things like that are not fun. But they weren't talking about health. They considered it unspiritual. Did the students at Moody become more spiritual because they did not have a beard? Did that guarantee that if I cut off my beard, I will instantly be more holy? I guarantee you when I have this trim, that will not instantaneously sanctify me. There are many things like that in churches. I'm not arguing whether those things are good or bad. I'm stating the making of rules around them does not necessarily guarantee the holiness of the individual in that church. Ceremonies do not make one holy. Now, Catholicism also gained ceremonialism. And so there are a host of ceremonies in Catholicism. Okay, 7 sacraments that are supposed to make you holy. Well, ceremonies that God gave began to be looked upon the Pharisees as a way of receiving holiness. And that doesn't work. Neither one of those makes you acceptable with God. See, that's what we have to go back to and very careful with as far as the gospel. But believing all the right stuff makes me saved and holy, doesn't it? No, sound doctrine does not make you acceptable, good, or righteous before God. Now, do you need sound doctrine to come to God? Yes. But does sound doctrine itself make one holy? Doctrinal arrogance and pride can be as much a sin as any other sin, but it's a nice sin, right? It's a form of false piety. And so my point is that, they're ignoring the sin nature here. They're trying to legislate it away. They're trying to ceremony it away. They're trying to right thinking it away. And I'm a big advocate of sound doctrine and right thinking, but I know I'm not saved because of my doctrine. I know that doesn't save me. That's important because I worship God with my mind. You shall love the Lord your God with all your mind. But it does not save me. The intellectual and the non-intellectual alike are welcome to Jesus. The little children were welcomed by Jesus, and they were not all Albert Einstein. Beware legalism. Beware it in the church. Sound doctrine is important, but sound doctrine doesn't save or sanctify. So, and Jack is right. It seems wrong that we could say that we could make ourselves holy, and that's exactly right. By the way, I appreciate the use of the Hebrew Kodesh by John Williams. John Williams threw that up, and I want to. That last part is really interesting. That's almost like a refrigerator magnet saying. So you guys can ponder that. I'll probably ponder that. And I got to give some credit. See, Slam stuck it right up there in the Hebrew Kodesh. So excellent job with the Hebrew keyboard. And so Jesus is just beginning with these guys, but he points out that their rules are not making people more holy, and their regard for the outward keeping of those rules as being the emphasis has made them callous and less sensitive to the heart of God and what God really desires for them as image bearers. And so they are putting themselves in a deplorable state. And so is anyone else that tries to do that. If they're saved, they're just retarding their growth. If they're unsaved, they're keeping themselves, they're creating stumbling blocks to the kingdom. And both of those are not good things to do. And Jack's saying we must desire to seek God, and that's always true. Wow. Somebody found a commentary by R.T. France, and they got it for 25 cents. And it's signed? That's a good little resale shop. So I'm just going through here, just picking up any comments or any questions that may have come up. It seems pretty straightforward as to what Jesus is getting at. He's going to talk about their conduct in certain areas. The reason I'm not moving on to that tonight is because I like to break things off where the pericope breaks off. And I wanted to deal with their position and, in a sense, their lack of possession of what God wanted them to have. And so they have made themselves enemies of God in trying to keep the rules of God by their own power and in their own way. And that's really tragic. So I'm looking to see, I wanted to see if anyone else from Facebook, because Facebook actually let me do this tonight, jumped on, but it does not appear so. So okay, well, this is where this section of Matthew ends. Probably could have gone a little deeper, but we just started 23. And so you can see what Jesus is starting to hit at. He's going to hit at some examples, and then he's going to let them know the decrepit position that they're in. And we are actually getting near the end of Matthew's gospel. We have about 5 chapters to go. Jimmy actually was there. Oh, that's so cool. I don't know if there's a way to reply. She is my wife's Sunday school teacher. So I will get her feedback. I have to get this off to Jimmy. I'm so excited. I'm going to see if it actually works. All right. Well, that's where we put ourselves for tonight. You have a little extra time. And some pericopes are longer. Sometimes we get better questions. Oh, that's very interesting. Napoleonic law. So common law was more like epidictic law as opposed to the other. So that's really cool. Just as far as, we talked about, the nature of case law, epidictic law. And then we talked about the other type of law, like the 10 Commandments law. And so it looks like the Napoleonic Code was different than the epidictic law. So that's kind of very interesting little point to bring out. Okay, there's a few things going on that even I don't understand, but that's okay. You guys are having a good time. Well, I don't know when I sign off whether Jimmy will be signed off too, but and I did not know I could switch destinations as to where I drew comments, but this has been exciting. I should say to Jimmy, Okay. Jimmy's teaching through Hebrews for the women. I'm going to pull the Napoleonic Code comment off there. And okay. Jimmy says she's signing off with me, so she's going to get bumped when I get bumped. When you get bumped, because that's the way it works. Ooh. What happened to the camera? Oh, my camera went weird. Okay. Okay, well, I guess my camera's getting tired. Thank you, Nate. Enjoy dinner or late dinner or ice cream or hot chocolate. And I'm going to go ahead and say good evening. And thanks to all of you. Now let me do the here. Okay. And I will see you next week. Oh, just a reminder. I don't want to stay on too long now that my camera's like unfocused. Just a reminder. I plan a special guest next week, Geoffrey Robinson, and we're working on the joint broadcast on the two Zechariahs and how Rabbi Tovia Singer gets Matthew right around 23, right where we're at, wrong. So I will hope to see many of you next week. Stick your hand up to the lens. It might readjust. Nope. Great idea. Well, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Good night.